Good morning, sixth graders, and welcome back to Unit 10. Today, we are going to be talking about histograms and frequency tables. To get us started, the first thing you're going to do is take 3 minutes on your own in Desmos to complete the frequency table for your Think About It problem. Your teacher is then going to show one of your teammates' frequency tables and engage you in a brief discussion before we come back together. Ready? Head into Desmos and answer your Think About It frequency table. Go. I hope you all had a good discussion about your frequency tables. This right here is an exemplar histogram that represents the data that we just looked at in our Think About It. So our next job is to pull out all of the pieces that make this histogram exemplar. Your teacher is going to give you directions on how you're going to engage with this question. What are all the attributes of an exemplar histogram? You'll use this image to engage with this question based on your teacher's directions, and then we will come back together to stamp these. Go. Hopefully in your discussion, you came out with these keys that make this histogram an exemplar. First is a title that represents the data. Next is that each bar is the same width, which means that the intervals are each the same size, which we see there on the bottom. Each interval includes 5 different possible data points. All of the bars are touching, so there's no space in between them, and both axes are labeled. We can see in this example, we have temperature on the x-axis and number of days on the y-axis. Now that we know all of the keys of a strong histogram, the next question is, if you were to show Mindy the frequency table or the histogram, we'll assume the frequency table is filled out accurately. Only one of them. Which would help Mindy best know the shape of her data? You're going to vote. When I say go, hold up a 1 if you think the frequency table, a 2 if you think the histogram. Your teacher will then call on one scholar to share before we stamp our key point for today. Ready? Vote. The histogram here would help us see the shape of Mindy's data better than a frequency table would. It gives us the same data, but by actually visually being able to see the histogram, we're able to interpret the data a lot more easily. And that brings us to our key point for today. A histogram allows one to easily see the shape of a data set distribution. Let's look at another problem together. Mr. Tiller graded his students' interim assessments and wants to share the data with his class. The students' score are as follows, and you can see all the test scores. Create a frequency table to model the data. When I say go, you'll have 2 minutes in Desmos to create your frequency table before we come back together. Go. Your frequency table should have looked like this. As you can see in our first interval of 60 to 69, we had 4 data points. 70 to 79, 6 data points, 80 to 89, 7 data points, and 90 to 99, 4 data points. Something different here was that we had to create our own intervals, and these were reasonable intervals that both were small enough that we could interpret the data, but large enough that they were able to encapsulate all of our data. Now that we have our frequency table, we know that the next step is to create a histogram. Before we actually look at a histogram for this data set, there is a series of questions for you to answer about what your histogram would look like in Desmos. Your teacher is going to look through your responses to each of these questions as you're answering them and debrief anyone that we are off track about. Then we'll come back together to see if all of the questions we answered actually play out in our histogram. Go. Now that you've had a chance to answer questions about the histogram, this is an example of what an exemplar histogram for this data set would look like. Remember, our axes are labeled, all of our intervals are the same size, and therefore our bars are the same width, and we have a title that represents our data set. Now, we have this histogram, but the most important thing is that we're able to interpret it. What conclusions can we draw from this histogram about the test scores in Mr. Tiller's class? Your teacher is going to give you expectations on how to engage with this question as a class, and then we'll come back together. Again, what conclusions can we draw from this histogram? I'm sure you all had a great discussion, and now it is time to launch into practice. As a reminder for our CFS today, when you are creating frequency tables, make sure you have your column heading with units, and also that you are selecting appropriate intervals if not given them. Lastly, histograms make sure you are always either interpreting or writing a title, labeling with units on the X and the Y axis, assigning appropriate intervals, and you should get those from your frequency table, and lastly, that bars are touching and are of equal width. Enjoy your practice today, and I will see you all tomorrow for another lesson in Unit 10. Thanks, everyone.